It all began on an overcast morning when she received a letter that would change the course of her life. The envelope was thick, yellowed with age, and sealed with crimson wax, stamped with an unfamiliar crest. Her name was written in elegant, looping handwriting that seemed almost alive, each curve and stroke carrying a weight of history. As she broke the seal, a sense of unease settled over her, a quiet premonition that this was no ordinary inheritance. Inside, the letter revealed that she had inherited an estate, a sprawling, centuries-old manor perched atop a hill, surrounded by gnarled oaks and fog-laden grounds. But the inheritance came with one chilling condition: she was never, under any circumstance, to enter the locked room upstairs. The warning was absolute, as if the room itself held a power that had transcended generations, waiting silently behind a heavy oak door that no key could fully reveal. At first, she tried to dismiss the warning as a formality, a quirk of eccentric relatives who had long passed. But something in the phrasing, a deliberate insistence in the letter, made her pause. The phrasing wasn't merely protective, it felt almost accusatory, as though the room was alive in its prohibition. She felt an unfamiliar thrill, an unsettling combination of curiosity and dread. Who had written this letter? And why had they gone to such lengths to protect a secret? Her life up to this point had been ordinary, comfortable, yet tinged with a quiet longing for something beyond the predictable rhythm of work and mundane routines. She had never imagined herself as the heir to a vast estate filled with history, secrets, and perhaps darkness. Yet now, with the key to a forbidden world placed metaphorically, and literally, in her hands, she felt a pull she could not resist. Even before setting foot on the estate, the mind began to wander into forbidden corners, imagining the mysteries waiting behind locked doors, imagining the echoes of generations past. Friends and colleagues noticed a subtle change in her demeanor. Where once she had been pragmatic and measured, now there was a restless energy, a flicker in her eyes when she mentioned the estate. Some warned her to be cautious, to treat the warning seriously. Others, curious like her, could only speculate on the secrets the letter hinted at. Each conversation left her both anxious and strangely exhilarated, reinforcing the sense that her life was about to shift into a story that had been centuries in the making. Even at home, alone in her apartment, she found herself staring at the envelope again and again, tracing the wax seal with her fingertips, imagining the rooms, the halls, and that single locked door looming somewhere above, unseen. She wondered who had inhabited the estate before her, what they had seen or done, and why the room had been sealed with such insistence. Shadows seemed longer, the air heavier, and her imagination relentless. Every night, she dreamed of the estate, of walking through hallways lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her, and of the locked room, silent and foreboding at the top of a staircase that seemed to stretch into the unknown. By the end of the day, the unease had transformed into an obsession. She could not stop thinking about the locked room, the condition, and the life she had been handed with this inheritance. The estate was no longer just property, it had become a character itself, alive, watchful, and waiting. And somewhere in the depths of that house, a story long buried was ready to resurface, whispering to her through the walls, daring her to step inside and uncover what had been forbidden for generations. The journey to the estate was unlike anything she had experienced. The road wound through dense forests, the trees arching overhead like silent sentinels. Mist clung to the ground, curling around the roots and rocks, giving the landscape an almost otherworldly quality. As the manor finally came into view, perched on its hill like a monument to a forgotten era, she felt a shiver run down her spine. The building was immense, its stone walls weathered by centuries, ivy clawing up toward the turrets, windows dark and reflecting the gray sky above. The estate was not merely a house, it was a presence, commanding, brooding, and impossibly old. As she approached the massive front doors, she noticed subtle details that spoke of long histories and secrets. The carvings on the oak doors were intricate, depicting scenes she could not immediately recognize, symbols that seemed both familiar and alien. The door knocker, shaped like a lion's head, was tarnished with age, yet it exuded a silent authority, as if guarding the threshold. When she touched it, the cold metal sent an unexpected jolt through her hand, and for a moment, she wondered whether the house itself had acknowledged her arrival. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of time itself. Each step she took echoed down the vast hallways, which were lined with portraits whose eyes seemed almost too alive, following her with subtle shifts of shadow and light. Rich tapestries hung from the walls, depicting scenes of hunting and feasts from centuries past, their colors faded but their stories preserved. The wooden floors creaked under her weight, each sound magnified in the cavernous spaces, reminding her that this was a home that had witnessed countless footsteps long before hers. The staff greeted her with measured politeness, but something in their manner felt reserved, almost cautious. They offered assistance, yet their eyes darted nervously toward the staircase that led to the upper floors. The housekeeper, an elderly woman with sharp features softened by age, spoke little, but her gaze lingered on her in a way that suggested knowledge she was not ready to share. The gardener, tending to the overgrown grounds, paused mid-prune as she passed, his expression tightening briefly before he returned to his work. Even the air seemed watchful, carrying whispers of past conversations, laughter, and arguments long extinguished but somehow still present in the echoes of the walls. She began to explore the estate cautiously, moving from room to room, each one revealing a different layer of history. The library was vast, filled with books whose spines bore titles in languages she barely recognized. Dust motes floated in the air, disturbed only by her movement, glinting in the weak light that filtered through tall, narrow windows. In the dining hall, a long table stretched the length of the room, set with tarnished silverware and faded linens, as if awaiting guests who would never arrive. Every corner of the house whispered of forgotten ceremonies, of celebrations and tragedies that had shaped its legacy. Despite its grandeur, there was an unmistakable sense of decay. Paint peeled from the walls in curling sheets, and the scent of damp wood lingered in hidden corners. Cobwebs draped from chandeliers, and some doors resisted her touch, stiff with age. Yet even in its deterioration, the estate retained an aura of power, of secrets held tightly and revealed only on its own terms. She felt simultaneously invited and warned, drawn deeper into the folds of a story that was not entirely hers, yet demanded her presence. The upper floors were even more imposing. The staircase spiraled upward in a slow, deliberate curve, the banister polished by hands that had long since vanished. With every step, she could feel the weight of history pressing down, the sense that she was entering a realm where time moved differently. It was here, near the top of the staircase, that she first caught sight of the infamous locked door. Its dark wood gleamed faintly in the dim light, the keyhole staring at her like a silent challenge. Despite the warnings, despite the weight of the letter in her bag and the admonitions from those around her, a strange compulsion made her pause before it, imagining what lay beyond, imagining what generations before her had feared and revered. Outside the windows, the ground stretched endlessly, shrouded in mist and shadows. The trees whispered in the wind, their branches scratching against the stone like skeletal fingers. She could hear the distant sound of a stream, the low croak of a crow, and the occasional snap of twigs under unseen feet. Every element of the estate, the house, the land, the air itself, worked in concert to unsettle and intrigue her, making the boundary between reality and imagination perilously thin. By the end of her first day, she had wandered through hallways and rooms, discovering artifacts and relics that spoke of lives lived, loves lost, and secrets hidden. Yet the locked room remained untouched, a dark promise at the top of the stairs, watching silently. She retired to her assigned chamber that night, her mind racing, heart pounding, already haunted by the sense that the estate was alive, aware of her, and waiting for her to take the next step. And somewhere deep within its walls, the story of the locked room began to stir, preparing to reach out and claim the attention it had been denied for generations. The first night in the estate was restless. Even in her chamber, with heavy curtains drawn and the fireplace crackling faintly, she could hear faint noises that seemed to echo through the halls, footsteps, a door creaking, whispers that vanished the moment she strained to listen. Sleep eluded her, replaced by a gnawing curiosity about the locked room upstairs. She remembered the letters and diaries she had discovered earlier, scraps of family history, personal confessions, and odd warnings scribbled in the margins. Each one seemed to pulse with life, a message left behind not just for her, but for anyone brave enough, or foolish enough, to confront the past. Morning brought no relief. As she walked through the halls, the sunlight revealed details she had missed the previous day. On a side table in the hallway lay an assortment of old keys, each with intricate designs, tarnished by age. They seemed ornamental, useless, yet their presence suggested careful planning. Someone had wanted her to notice them, to wonder which door they might open, and whether one could fit the infamous locked room. Her hand trembled as she reached out to touch them, half expecting a jolt of some ancient warning. The library offered even more. Between dusty tomes, she found a series of journals, their leather bindings cracked, pages yellowed and brittle. One entry described a room where shadows breathe and secrets lie in wait. Another recounted an argument between two ancestors, their words bitter and fearful, concerning the inheritance and a mistake made decades earlier. The narrative was fragmented, each entry ending abruptly, as though the writer had been interrupted or silenced. The incomplete stories only deepened the mystery, suggesting that the estate itself had swallowed countless secrets over generations. Artifacts throughout the house added layers to the enigma. A shattered mirror in the hallway reflected distorted images, making her pause and question what was real and what was merely a trick of the glass. Old portraits of previous occupants, once dignified and lifelike, now carried subtle hints of something more sinister. Eyes that seemed to glimmer when she wasn't looking directly, smiles that twisted unnaturally in shadowed corners, these were not mere paintings, but warnings etched into the very walls of the estate. Every object seemed to whisper, observe carefully, or suffer ignorance. Staff interactions became increasingly strange. The housekeeper, who had once merely observed her, began offering cryptic comments, "Not everything you see is meant to be understood," or, "Some doors are locked for good reason." The gardener, too, seemed burdened with knowledge, glancing nervously at the upper floors as he spoke. Their caution only heightened her own curiosity, a subtle reverse psychology that drew her deeper into the estate's intricate web. It was clear that everyone who had lived here, and even those who served it now, carried fragments of knowledge too dangerous or too horrifying to fully reveal. A particularly unsettling moment occurred in the dining hall. While examining a set of letters tucked behind an old silver tray, she discovered a reference to a missing family member, last seen near the locked room decades ago. The letters hinted at an argument, a secret so severe it demanded silence, and a fear so potent that the writer had insisted on binding the truth in ink, knowing only the future heir might dare to uncover it. Her pulse quickened. This was no ordinary inheritance, it was a legacy tainted with fear, secrets, and perhaps violence. Even the architecture seemed designed to unsettle her. Narrow corridors twisted unexpectedly, staircases led to dead ends, and doors appeared and disappeared depending on the angle of light. She began to sense a deliberate pattern, as if the house itself was testing her, gauging her curiosity, measuring her resolve. Every turn she took, every door she passed, seemed to mock her, daring her to enter the forbidden upper floor. The locked room loomed in her imagination, a silent character in a story she was only beginning to understand. By the afternoon, she had begun to map the house in her mind, tracing routes and noting anomalies. She had discovered a hidden alcove behind a bookshelf, containing journals that referenced even older generations, each obsessed with the room and the secrets it held. It became apparent that the room was not merely a physical space, but a symbol of control, fear, and forbidden knowledge that had been carefully curated and protected over centuries. Her sense of reality wavered, blending curiosity with apprehension. What lay beyond the door? What had been kept hidden for so long, and why? As evening fell, the estate seemed to shift again. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, the walls felt closer, and the wind whispered through cracks in ways that sounded eerily like voices. She sat alone in the dim glow of a candle, piecing together the fragments she had gathered, letters, diaries, artifacts, and subtle warnings. Each clue intensified the mystery, constructing a puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. Yet she could not turn away, the estate had her attention, had claimed her curiosity, and perhaps, had claimed something deeper, her very sense of safety. By the end of the day, it was clear that she was no longer merely an observer. She had stepped into a web woven across generations, where every artifact, every whisper, every glance from the staff carried significance. The estate, and especially the locked room, had become an obsession. The pieces of the past called to her, daring her to uncover them, warning that some truths were dangerous, and hinting that once uncovered, nothing would ever be the same. And somewhere, high above, the locked door waited silently, its secrets pressing against the thin barrier that separated her from a story centuries in the making. By the time she had spent several days wandering the estate, the locked room had evolved in her mind from a simple curiosity into an obsession. Each hallway she traversed, every stair she ascended, seemed to direct her toward it. It was a presence rather than a mere door, a silent sentinel that had watched over the estate for decades, perhaps centuries. Its dark wood was polished yet aged, the keyhole catching the light in a way that made it seem almost like an eye observing her movements. She could feel the weight of generations pressing down through that door, a barrier not just of wood and iron, but of fear, secrecy, and unspoken history. The staff had become increasingly cautious, their behavior straddling the line between polite assistance and silent warning. The housekeeper, in particular, avoided any mention of the room, her eyes darting away whenever it was brought up. Her words, when spoken, carried double meanings, layered with subtle hints and cryptic advice. Some doors, she had said one morning, are locked not to keep people out, but to keep them safe from what lies within. The statement lingered in her mind, both warning and tempting her, leaving her to question whether the danger was physical, psychological, or something far older and more sinister. Curiosity gnawed at her relentlessly. Every artifact she had discovered, every diary entry, every warning from the staff seemed to converge on this one location. She began to imagine what might be behind the door, a room preserved through time, holding forbidden knowledge, secrets of madness or murder, or perhaps the tragic remnants of a family cursed by generations of greed and betrayal. The locked room had become a character in its own right, silent, forbidding, and yet undeniably magnetic. Her first attempt to approach it was cautious. She climbed the grand staircase, each step creaking under her weight, echoing through the hallways like a drumbeat announcing her presence. The upper floors were colder, the air heavier, as though the house itself was aware of her movements. Tapestries and paintings seemed to shift in the dim light, shadows stretching in unnatural directions. She stopped just short of the door, feeling a wave of anxiety mixed with exhilaration. The closer she came, the more palpable the sense of history became, of lives intertwined, of joys and betrayals that had all left an imprint upon the house. She ran her fingers along the edges of the door, tracing the intricate carvings that adorned its surface. The designs were unlike anything she had seen elsewhere in the house, almost ritualistic, with motifs that suggested both protection and imprisonment. She pressed her ear against the wood, half expecting to hear whispers, the faint shuffle of a past long gone, or even the sound of the door itself breathing. Silence greeted her, heavy and oppressive, amplifying her heartbeat, as if the room were assessing her courage, weighing her right to cross the threshold. The more she thought about entering, the more conflicted she became. Rationality warned her against it. After all, the inheritance came with an explicit condition never to enter the room. Breaking it could have consequences beyond her understanding. Yet the stories she had pieced together from diaries, letters, and staff whispers suggested that the room contained a truth that could not remain hidden forever. It was the crux of the estate's history, a focal point around which decades of fear, obsession, and secrecy revolved. Every instinct told her to stop, and every instinct told her to proceed. In her sleepless nights, she dreamed of the room. In these dreams, the door loomed larger than life, the carvings shifting, the keyhole glowing faintly as if inviting her to peer inside. She imagined seeing shadows move independently of the light, glimpses of faces she did not recognize, and hints of tragedies too vast and terrible to comprehend. She awoke with the image seared into her mind, and each day spent wandering the estate without confronting it only intensified her fixation. The room demanded attention, demanded discovery, and she felt powerless to resist. She began observing the patterns of the house, noting how the air seemed colder near the upper floors, how the lights flickered unnaturally, and how the staff unconsciously avoided that section of the building. Even the estate's architecture seemed designed to protect the door, staircases curving subtly, hallways narrowing, almost hurting her toward it without revealing the danger outright. It was as if the house itself had become a guardian, a storyteller, waiting for the right moment for her to understand its history fully. The tension became almost unbearable one evening. She was alone, exploring a corridor near the upper floors, when a distant sound, a soft scraping, almost like fingernails against wood, echoed from the locked room. Her heart leapt. The sound stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence that pressed down on her chest. She questioned her own senses, wondering if it was imagination, wind, or the house testing her resolve. And yet, the sensation was real enough to make her reconsider her actions, to remind her that curiosity in this place was never neutral, it carried consequences she could not yet fathom. By the end of the fourth day, it was clear that the locked room had consumed her thoughts. She spoke less, observed more, and felt herself becoming part of the estate's rhythm. Shadows seemed to follow her, whispers brushed past her ears, and the air near the upper floors carried a weight she could not shake. The door, unyielding and silent, remained a challenge and a promise. It was no longer merely a physical space, it was a symbol of everything the estate had been hiding, a dark magnet drawing her toward revelations that might terrify or destroy her. And so, with every cautious step and stolen glance, she prepared herself for a confrontation she both feared and craved. The locked room awaited, patient and eternal, a sentinel of secrets long buried. Behind that door lay the culmination of centuries of fear, obsession, and perhaps something far darker than she could imagine. And as she stood there, hand hovering over the cold wood, she understood, with a deep and instinctive certainty, that nothing about this room was ordinary, and that once she crossed its threshold, nothing would ever be the same. Once the initial obsession with the locked room had taken hold, she began to notice other peculiarities within the estate, subtle details that had previously gone unnoticed. Walls seemed thicker in some places than others, as though concealing hidden chambers or passages. Floors creaked in specific patterns, almost like deliberate signals or warnings. Doors that appeared ordinary sometimes revealed concealed compartments, and she found herself constantly questioning the house itself. Was it merely a building, or a living entity, steeped in memory and secrets, guiding her toward truths she had not yet earned? Her exploration led her to the library once more, this time with a more methodical approach. She pulled books at random, letting intuition guide her. Behind one shelf, she discovered a hidden alcove containing bundles of letters, diaries, and even sketches of the estate drawn by previous occupants. The documents spanned decades, chronicling the lives, disputes, and tragedies of the family that had once ruled this manor. Names repeated across generations, as if the same dramas, the same obsessions, had cycled endlessly. Some entries detailed minor disagreements, but others hinted at deeper, darker conflicts, disappearances, untimely deaths, and the obsessive guarding of a particular room at the top of the house. One diary in particular caught her attention. Its pages were fragile, filled with cramped handwriting that wavered as though the author had been writing under extreme fear or agitation. The entry spoke of the room as a place of revelation and horror, a location that could consume a person's sanity if approached unprepared. The author recounted a night when a family member had defied the warnings and entered the room, never to be seen again. The language was cryptic but urgent, imploring future generations to heed the warning. Each passage left her heart racing. She could feel the weight of history pressing down upon her, as though the past itself had reached forward through ink and paper to caution her. Artifacts scattered throughout the house reinforced the diary's warnings. An old, cracked mirror in the corridor reflected more than her image, or so it seemed. Sometimes, she swore she saw movement behind her, shadows that did not belong to her or to the furniture. Portraits, once dignified, now appeared almost accusatory. Eyes followed her with a gaze so intense it felt alive, and subtle differences in expression made her question whether she was truly seeing what was there, or what the estate wanted her to see. Even the furniture seemed positioned deliberately, almost ritualistically, guiding her movement and drawing her attention toward certain objects while concealing others. She began to piece together a narrative. The estate's previous inhabitants had been obsessed with something, an object, a secret, a presence, so vital that it necessitated a room that was locked for protection, fear, or perhaps punishment. The more she uncovered, the more evident it became that the room was the keystone of a family legacy fraught with danger, obsession, and betrayal. Letters hinted at feuds that escalated over generations, conflicts resolved through secrecy and manipulation, always centered around what lay beyond that fateful door. She realized the locked room was not merely a room, it was a symbol, a repository for the sins, fears, and secrets of countless lives. In her quest, she discovered letters between distant relatives, some never having lived in the estate, discussing the necessity of guarding the room. One letter warned, "The room remembers. It punishes those who enter unprepared." Another described attempts to document the contents without seeing them directly, employing indirect methods, veiled language, and coded warnings to protect future heirs. It was clear that the estate had not only been a home but a fortress of knowledge and fear, each generation contributing its own layer to a mystery designed to endure. Even minor discoveries added to the tension. A set of keys, long unused and dusty, suggested entrances to hidden cabinets or secret compartments. A locked chest contained old letters sealed with wax, each marked with cryptic symbols that matched carvings on the upper floor doors. She began mapping the estate meticulously, noting patterns that seemed intentional, hallways leading to dead ends, windows positioned to frame certain views, and staircases subtly redirecting movement. Every detail reinforced the sense that the house itself was a guide, or a gatekeeper, to the ultimate secret, lying behind the locked door. Staff behavior added another layer to her understanding. The housekeeper's warnings, the gardener's nervous glances, even the subtle avoidance by the remaining staff suggested that the secrets she was uncovering were alive in memory, not just in writing. Their silence spoke volumes. It was a protective silence, an attempt to shield her from forces or knowledge that had consumed those before her. Each interaction intensified the suspense, leaving her torn between caution and an irresistible drive to know the truth. By the third day of her focused exploration, she stumbled upon a narrow, hidden passage behind a heavy curtain in the corridor adjoining the upper floors. It was dark, dusty, and long forgotten. The air inside smelled of age, neglect, and something more intangible, a hint of secrets too long concealed. As she stepped inside, the walls seemed to close around her, shadows deepening as if the estate itself was warning her, testing her resolve. The passage eventually led to an observation point that overlooked the locked room's door from a hidden angle. From this vantage, she could see the intricate carvings, the cold gleam of the keyhole, and subtle scratches around the frame, suggesting that the room had been approached before, even if never entered. The cumulative weight of these discoveries began to affect her psychologically. Sleep became fragmented, dreams haunted by shadows moving in the corridors, whispers of names she had read only in letters and diaries. She felt watched, not by a person, but by the very history embedded within the estate. The locked room was no longer merely a destination, it was a presence, influencing her thoughts, guiding her actions, and shaping her perception of reality. Every clue reinforced the same truth: this room held the convergence of centuries of fear, obsession, and secrecy. By the end of her investigations that day, she understood that the estate was not simply a setting, it was a living narrative, its walls steeped in stories that demanded attention. Every artifact, diary, and hidden passage was part of a larger puzzle, and the locked room remained the focal point of it all. She could sense its pull, silent yet powerful, drawing her toward revelations that had been carefully obscured for generations. The estate had become more than a home, it had become an active participant in her journey, shaping her understanding and preparing her for the ultimate confrontation that awaited behind that door. The estate had already claimed her attention, but soon it began to claim more than her curiosity, it began to infiltrate her senses. Strange occurrences started subtly, almost imperceptibly, but grew increasingly difficult to ignore. At first, it was a creak in the floorboard when no one else was present, the soft brush of air against her cheek when all windows were shut, the faint scent of lavender where none had been sprayed. These were small things, easily dismissed, yet cumulatively they created a gnawing unease that threaded through every step she took within the house. One evening, as she climbed the staircase toward the upper floors, she heard a whisper, barely audible, almost lost in the echo of her own footsteps. She froze, straining to listen, heart pounding, certain that someone must be nearby. But when she turned the corner, the hallway was empty. The whisper was gone, leaving only the soft creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. She questioned her sanity, wondering if fatigue, stress, and obsession were bending her perception of reality. Yet a lingering sensation of being watched persisted, as though the estate itself had eyes she could not see. Objects began to move, ever so slightly, when she wasn't looking directly at them. A book left on a table one morning appeared at a different angle the next day. A chair shifted imperceptibly, its placement altering the shadow patterns in a way that drew her attention. She rationalized these as consequences of uneven floors, drafts, or the house settling, but even as she convinced herself, a deeper part of her knew that something more deliberate was at work. The estate was reacting to her presence, testing her, guiding her toward truths that had been concealed for generations. The nights were the most unsettling. She would awaken to the sound of footsteps pacing the hallways outside her room, or the distant slam of a door that had been closed tightly the night before. Curtains fluttered without wind, chandeliers swayed slightly, casting shifting shadows across the walls. On more than one occasion, she had glimpsed fleeting shapes at the edge of her vision, shadows moving independently of any physical cause. Each time she turned, the hallways were empty, silent, yet the sensation of being observed only intensified. It was as if the house itself were alive, aware of her presence, and eager to communicate its warnings and secrets without uttering a single word. One particularly chilling morning, she discovered a set of footprints in the dust along a corridor that she knew she had cleaned herself only hours before. They were small, almost childlike, and they led directly toward the upper floors, stopping abruptly outside the locked room's door. No other signs of disturbance accompanied them, no footprints in other areas, no evidence of entry or exit. The discovery left her shaken. Someone, or something, had been here, and yet the house remained undisturbed elsewhere, as if the entity knew exactly where to appear and vanish without a trace. Staff reactions began to grow more pronounced. The housekeeper's warnings became more urgent, though still cryptic. "Do not trust what you see when the night is quiet," she said, eyes flicking nervously toward the staircase. The gardener avoided the upper floors altogether, and even casual servants whispered when asked about the strange happenings, casting glances toward doors she dared not open. It became apparent that the strange occurrences were not just her imagination, they were known, observed, and feared by those who had lived in or served the estate for years. During one exploratory session in the library, she discovered a journal detailing past incidents remarkably similar to her own experiences. One ancestor had reported objects shifting on their own, whispers in empty corridors, and fleeting shadows glimpsed just at the periphery of vision. These events had been recorded meticulously, though dismissed by outsiders as the eccentricities of a paranoid family. Reading the journal, she realized with a chill that the estate had been manifesting these phenomena for generations, targeting those who dared probe too deeply into its secrets. Even the natural world seemed to respond to her presence. Windows rattled during calm nights, candles flickered in patterns she could not explain, and a sudden chill would envelop rooms with no apparent source. On the rare occasions she ventured into the gardens, she noticed how the wind seemed to change direction when she moved, rustling branches in ways that mimicked whispered voices. Birds avoided the upper floors, and the occasional crow perched in the trees would fix its gaze on her, unblinking, as though aware of her intrusion into the estate's inner sanctum. Psychologically, the occurrences began to wear on her. Sleep became fragmented, each night bringing dreams filled with distorted corridors, shifting shadows, and echoes of voices she recognized from the diaries and letters she had read. She began to question what was real and what was imagined, the boundaries between memory, perception, and the estate's manipulations blurring. Her fascination with the locked room intensified simultaneously, a paradoxical mix of fear and irresistible curiosity driving her forward despite every warning her mind could muster. By the end of her first week, she had come to understand that the estate operated on multiple levels: physical, psychological, and perhaps even something more arcane. Every creak, whisper, and shifting shadow was part of a larger pattern, a test, or perhaps a guide. She was drawn inexorably toward the locked room, yet the strange occurrences were a constant reminder that the journey would not be simple or safe. Every encounter with the inexplicable reinforced the idea that this house, and particularly the locked room, had been alive and aware for generations, awaiting someone with both curiosity and courage to confront its most closely guarded secrets. And so, with every whisper, every shadow, and every inexplicable sensation, she became increasingly aware that she was no longer merely a visitor. The estate had claimed her attention, her imagination, and even her sense of reality. The strange occurrences were not random, they were signals, warnings, and invitations all at once. She understood, with a mixture of dread and anticipation, that the moment to face the locked room was approaching. The estate was preparing her, testing her resolve, strengthening her obsession, and reminding her that some secrets demanded a price, and some truths were far more dangerous than they appeared. As she delved deeper into the estate's history, it became impossible to separate the past from the present. The walls themselves seemed to whisper stories long silenced, and the house had begun to assert a presence so palpable that every step felt like an intrusion into someone else's memory. Diaries, letters, and hidden notes she had collected formed a tapestry of obsession, fear, and secrets, each thread pointing relentlessly toward the locked room. But the past did not remain buried. It returned with a force she could feel in her bones, in the sudden chill that passed through a room, in the fleeting shadow that darted across the hallway, in the low murmur of voices when no one else was present. The more she uncovered, the more vivid the stories became. A series of disappearances, spanning decades, revealed a pattern. Heirs and housekeepers alike had vanished, some leaving cryptic notes, others leaving nothing at all. One journal described a family member who had entered the locked room in defiance of the warnings, never to be seen again, and another recorded the anguish of those left behind, their grief layered with fear. These accounts, written in trembling hand and veiled language, hinted at a dark legacy that had been carefully curated and guarded through generations. The estate had become a mausoleum of its own history, a repository of tragedies that demanded attention and respect. She discovered correspondence between distant relatives, letters discussing the necessity of secrecy and the dangers of curiosity. "The room is not merely wood and locks," one ancestor wrote. "It is a mirror, a witness, and a judge. Those who enter unprepared do not return unchanged, if they return at all." The words resonated with her, chilling her even as they fascinated her. She realized that the locked room was not just a physical space but a culmination of family obsession, a place where history had condensed into a tangible, almost living entity. Old portraits and relics in the upper floors seemed to take on new significance in light of these discoveries. A painting of a stern-looking man now felt like an accusation, his eyes tracking her, demanding an answer to questions she had not yet articulated. An intricately carved chair, which had seemed decorative before, now appeared to serve as a marker, positioned to direct attention toward the locked room. Every object in the house seemed deliberately placed, part of a historical choreography designed to protect, warn, and perhaps manipulate. She began to feel that the house itself was alive, orchestrating her movements, preparing her for revelations she could scarcely imagine. In her research, she uncovered a detailed account of an event long considered rumor, a fire that had devastated one wing of the estate nearly a century ago. The record suggested that the fire had been contained intentionally, sparing certain areas while consuming others. Some accounts implied that the locked room had remained untouched, shielded not just by doors but by a web of family machinations. The fire, it seemed, was not an accident but a carefully executed act to preserve the secrets within while demonstrating the consequences of disobedience. The magnitude of this revelation left her shaken. The estate's history was not just mysterious, it was dangerous, deliberate, and intricately plotted. Other documents hinted at conflicts among family members over the room's contents. Legal disputes, clandestine agreements, and veiled threats had been made to ensure that the room remained sealed. One letter described a confrontation that ended in a death shrouded in secrecy, another spoke of an heir so terrified of the room that they fled the estate, leaving behind all claims and responsibilities. These historical fragments intertwined with her present experience, suggesting that the estate's influence was not bound by time, it reached forward to shape events in the present as surely as it had in the past. Psychologically, the merging of past and present began to take a toll. She noticed moments when she could almost hear footsteps of ancestors walking the halls alongside her, or the soft creak of a door as though someone had just passed through. Her dreams became increasingly vivid, blending historical events with her own exploration, until she sometimes woke unsure whether she had witnessed a memory or a dream. The estate, with its centuries of layered experiences, seemed determined to immerse her completely, to make her understand that the past was never gone, it was living, watching, and waiting. An unexpected discovery in a hidden compartment revealed a collection of photographs and sketches, chronicling events that had been deliberately obscured from history. Scenes of celebrations twisted by tension, images of arguments and confrontations frozen in time, and faces marked by fear or anguish provided a chilling glimpse into the daily life of those who had inhabited the estate. Each artifact reinforced the idea that the family had been haunted long before she arrived, that obsession, secrecy, and the locked room had defined generations. The past was alive here, tangible and pressing, demanding her attention as though she had been summoned to witness and participate in its unresolved narratives. The culmination of these discoveries created a sense of inevitability. She understood that the locked room was not simply a place to be explored, it was a nexus where the estate's history, obsessions, and fears converged. The past had shaped the present in every corridor, every artifact, and every whisper. Every shadow, every subtle occurrence she had observed, could now be traced back to historical events, giving the estate a coherence that was as terrifying as it was fascinating. She felt herself pulled toward the upper floors, toward the room whose legacy spanned centuries, and knew that what lay beyond would reveal not just the estate's secrets, but the culmination of generations' fears and obsessions. By the end of this phase of her investigation, she was no longer simply exploring the estate. She was interacting with its history, with echoes of people long gone yet intensely present. The past had returned, its fingerprints on walls, furniture, and hidden passages guiding her inexorably toward confrontation. The estate had become a bridge between then and now, a place where stories refused to die, and where curiosity was both a gift and a peril. She understood that the next step, facing the locked room, would not be merely a physical act, but an encounter with the full weight of history itself, a confrontation with the lives, fears, and obsessions that had accumulated for centuries behind that door. And as she stood before the threshold of the upper floors once more, the air heavy with anticipation and the echoes of the past ringing in her ears, she realized that the estate's history was no longer something she could observe from a distance. It had returned to claim her involvement, and in doing so, had set the stage for revelations that would redefine her understanding of the house, the room, and herself. The past was alive, and it was ready to speak. After weeks of piecing together the estate's history, following whispers of the past, and tracing every clue, she found herself standing once more at the top of the staircase, facing the infamous locked room. By now, the door was more than wood and iron, it had become a symbol, a nexus of generations of secrets, obsessions, and fear. Every fiber of her being sensed its weight, and yet a paradoxical force pulled her forward, as if the room itself demanded her presence, demanding acknowledgement of a truth that had remained hidden for centuries. She lingered, hand hovering over the cold, intricately carved surface. The carving seemed to shift under her gaze, intricate patterns that suggested both protection and imprisonment. She recalled the warnings, the letter she had received, the housekeeper's cryptic advice, the journal entries chronicling those who had vanished after attempting to enter. Each story, each fragment of history, seemed to converge here, coalescing into a tangible tension that made her chest tighten. Was she ready for what lay beyond? Could any preparation truly suffice against the weight of generations? Her fingers brushed against the keyhole, smooth yet unyielding. The air around her seemed charged, vibrating subtly, carrying a whisper of all that had come before. In a sudden flash, she saw the faces of those who had preceded her, ancestors who had dared, servants who had witnessed, family members who had fled in terror. They were all there, specters of memory and history, pressing her toward a choice she could neither postpone nor escape. To step back would be to ignore a legacy, yet to proceed was to confront the culmination of centuries of obsession, fear, and secrecy. Taking a deep breath, she inserted the key she had found tucked away in the alcove days earlier. It fit perfectly, turning with a reluctant, echoing click. The sound reverberated through the hallways, as if announcing her decision to the estate itself. The door creaked open slowly, revealing darkness so complete that it seemed to swallow the light from the staircase. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching unnaturally, and a faint chill swept through the room, brushing against her skin. The threshold felt like a barrier not just between rooms, but between eras, between safety and the unknown. Inside, the room was vast yet intimate, a contradiction that unsettled her immediately. Dust motes floated lazily in the weak light that seeped through a small, grimy window. Every surface bore signs of careful preservation, as though the previous occupants had curated this space with ritualistic precision. Shelves lined with old books, boxes neatly stacked, and artifacts displayed as if in a museum, yet each item carried a sinister undertone. She could sense a chronology here, a deliberate arrangement that chronicled centuries of obsession, fear, and suppressed knowledge. The first object she noticed was a mirror, tall and framed with dark, ornate wood. Its surface was strangely reflective yet seemed to ripple faintly, as if distorting more than just her physical image. Approaching cautiously, she saw what appeared to be fleeting shadows behind her reflection, figures she had no memory of seeing, and yet felt hauntingly familiar. Her pulse quickened. The mirror seemed to hold memories, or perhaps echoes, capturing moments of despair, conflict, and secrecy from the estate's past. It was both a witness and a participant, a conduit through which the room preserved the emotional weight of those who had lived and died within its influence. Artifacts and documents within the room revealed layers of hidden history she had only glimpsed in fragmented diaries and letters. A journal, opened carefully, recounted the final days of a family member who had defied the warnings, a descent into paranoia, obsession, and ultimately disappearance. Sketches depicted ritualistic arrangements within the estate, symbolic alignments that corresponded to the room's layout. Letters described legal maneuvers and threats designed to maintain secrecy, while personal notes conveyed fear, guilt, and the burden of knowledge. Each item added depth to the story, each artifact a piece of the puzzle that made the room feel alive, aware, and deeply sentient. She noticed subtle signs of attempts at concealment. Boxes labeled with cryptic symbols, objects carefully placed to obscure or distract, and hidden compartments that suggested a need to preserve certain items from prying eyes. It became clear that the room was designed not merely to contain objects, but to structure knowledge, to safeguard dangerous truths while communicating just enough to intrigue the curious. She felt a connection to those who had come before her, recognizing the same curiosity, the same obsession, and the same peril that had drawn them here. The atmosphere was oppressive yet magnetic. Shadows moved unpredictably, light refracted in strange patterns, and the faint scent of old parchment mixed with something harder to identify, iron, wax, and something almost organic. Each sensory detail heightened her awareness, making her acutely conscious of the room as a living entity, responsive and intelligent in ways she could not fully comprehend. Even the floorboards seemed to carry echoes, vibrations of footsteps that were not her own, guiding her attention toward specific objects as if orchestrating her experience. Her investigation led her to a locked chest in the corner, its surface carved with the same intricate designs as the door. Trembling slightly, she unlocked it, revealing a collection of letters, jewelry, and small personal artifacts. Among them was a sealed envelope addressed to her in the same elegant handwriting that had marked the inheritance letter. Inside, the note provided a revelation that reframed everything she had experienced. The room had been preserved not merely for protection, but as a testament, a final witness to events that had shaped the estate, and a guide for her to understand the legacy she had inherited. The handwriting spoke of fear, responsibility, and the necessity of respect, emphasizing that knowledge without comprehension could be as dangerous as disobedience. As she processed this revelation, a sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow, fleeting yet undeniable, at the edge of the room. She froze, heartbeat racing, aware that the room was responding to her presence. A whisper, barely audible, brushed past her ear, a voice, layered with the echoes of past occupants, warning and guiding simultaneously. The experience was disorienting yet illuminating, forcing her to recognize that the locked room had never been static, it had been interactive, communicating through environment, objects, and subtle cues. It demanded attention, reflection, and courage in equal measure. Hours passed, though time felt suspended, as she explored every corner, examining every artifact, and absorbing the weight of history that permeated the space. She realized that the room's true purpose was not merely to conceal, but to educate, challenge, and reveal the complexities of human obsession, secrecy, and fear. Every shadow, every object, and every whisper was a lesson, carefully curated by those who had come before her. The room was alive with knowledge, demanding careful observation and emotional engagement to fully comprehend its significance. By the end of her first confrontation with the room, she understood that she had crossed a threshold not just physically, but psychologically and emotionally. The locked room had transformed from a forbidden space into a living archive, a repository of centuries of human behavior and consequence. She felt both awe and trepidation, recognizing that the room's revelations were ongoing, layered, and infinitely complex. The truth she faced was not singular, it was a mosaic of fear, obsession, and legacy, demanding her engagement and reflection, and forever altering her relationship with the estate and herself. And as she finally stepped back, the door closed behind her with a resonant click, she realized that she had not merely uncovered the room's contents. She had engaged with its very essence, a confrontation that would shape the rest of her life. The estate had allowed her entry, had guided her experience, and had imparted lessons that would echo long after she left the room. In that moment, she understood the power of history, the weight of secrets, and the living nature of curiosity and consequence. The locked room had spoken, and she had listened. The moments following her encounter with the locked room were unlike anything she had anticipated. The estate seemed quieter, almost reverent, as if it had paused to allow her to process the weight of what she had witnessed. The air carried a stillness that was both comforting and unsettling, a stark contrast to the tension that had dominated her previous days. She walked slowly through the halls, her mind replaying each detail, the artifacts, the letters, the whispers of the past, and the fleeting shadows that had seemed to observe her. Every step reminded her that she had crossed a boundary, entering a realm of knowledge and history that was as alive as it was secretive. Her initial response was one of awe. The room had revealed more than physical artifacts, it had unveiled patterns of behavior, cycles of fear, and legacies of obsession that spanned generations. She understood, more profoundly than ever, that the estate was not merely a collection of walls and furniture, but a living record of human experience, meticulously preserved and deliberately orchestrated. Each object, each shadow, and each whisper had contributed to a narrative far larger than any single individual could fully comprehend. She realized that her role was not just as an observer, but as a participant in a story centuries in the making. Yet awe quickly gave way to introspection. The weight of responsibility pressed upon her. She had not merely inherited an estate, she had inherited the legacy of countless lives, each shaped by choices, secrets, and consequences. The letters and journals she had studied emphasized the importance of understanding this legacy, warning that ignorance or carelessness could perpetuate harm. She recognized the delicate balance between curiosity and respect, realizing that her actions would influence not only her own fate but potentially the fate of the estate and its history. As she moved through familiar corridors, she began to notice subtle changes. Shadows seemed less ominous but more intentional, almost as if the estate acknowledged her comprehension. Objects that had once seemed cryptic now made sense in context, their placements revealing a careful chronology and deliberate intention. The experience had sharpened her perception, attuning her to nuances she had previously overlooked. She began mapping these details, connecting patterns, and understanding that the estate's design was both protective and instructive, a multidimensional puzzle intended to convey lessons to those willing to engage fully. Interactions with the staff took on new dimensions as well. The housekeeper, who had once been enigmatic and cautious, now offered guidance tempered with respect, recognizing her engagement with the estate's deeper truths. The gardener, too, became more forthcoming, subtly assisting her exploration while maintaining the careful boundaries of secrecy that had been observed for decades. Even minor interactions carried significance, gestures, phrases, and glances hinted at histories and protocols designed to safeguard the integrity of the estate's knowledge. She realized that these individuals were not merely servants, they were custodians of a living history, intermediaries between the past and the present. Emotionally, she experienced a complex blend of relief and disquiet. Relief, because she had faced the locked room, navigated its challenges, and emerged with an understanding that had eluded generations. Disquiet, because the revelations were not simple or comforting, they were layered with fear, obsession, and moral ambiguity. She recognized that every act of curiosity had consequences, that knowledge carried responsibility, and that the room's revelations were not merely factual but existential, shaping her perception of human nature, legacy, and the passage of time. The psychological impact was equally profound. She began to process the estate as a living entity, understanding its manipulations and its pedagogy. The strange occurrences she had experienced, the whispers, shadows, and shifting objects, were not random but purposeful, intended to prepare her for comprehension and reflection. Her mind was attuned now, capable of perceiving subtleties she had previously dismissed as coincidence. She realized that the estate had tested her resilience, patience, and judgment, and in doing so had imparted a deeper awareness of the interplay between curiosity, fear, and knowledge. Reflection also brought clarity regarding the locked room's function. It was not simply a repository of secrets or a trap for the curious, it was an archive, a classroom, and a mirror. It preserved both tangible objects and the intangible consequences of human action. The previous generations had constructed it to transmit wisdom while enforcing caution, ensuring that the lessons of history were neither lost nor misapplied. She understood that her engagement with the room had transformed her perspective, equipping her to navigate the estate and its legacy with insight and discernment. As the days passed, she noticed that her behavior and mindset had shifted. She moved with purpose through the halls, attuned to patterns and connections. Decisions that once would have been made impulsively were now tempered by historical context and awareness of consequences. She approached artifacts and letters with deliberate attention, piecing together narratives not merely for curiosity but for comprehension and preservation. The estate had imparted lessons that extended beyond its physical boundaries, shaping her judgment, patience, and emotional acuity. By the end of her first week after confronting the locked room, she had begun to integrate these lessons into her daily life. Sleep became less fragmented, dreams less chaotic, though still imbued with shadows and whispers that reminded her of the room's presence and influence. She had emerged not merely as a visitor or inheritor, but as a participant in the estate's ongoing story. The weight of history was no longer abstract, it was tangible, shaping her thoughts, actions, and understanding. She realized that the room's power lay not only in what it concealed, but in how it guided engagement, reflection, and emotional growth. In the broader perspective, she recognized that the aftermath of confronting the locked room extended beyond personal comprehension. The estate itself seemed to settle into a new rhythm, as though acknowledging her successful navigation of its challenges. The artifacts, letters, and shadows continued to exist, but their presence was now instructive rather than threatening. The living history of the house remained, but she had attained a level of understanding that allowed her to participate responsibly, rather than be overwhelmed by fear or curiosity. Ultimately, the experience left her with profound realizations about legacy, human nature, and the interplay of secrecy and revelation. She understood that the locked room, and indeed the entire estate, functioned as a multidimensional narrative, transmitting lessons across generations through a combination of material evidence, psychological cues, and emotional resonance. Her engagement with it had been transformative, reshaping her perception of inheritance, curiosity, and the responsibilities that accompany knowledge. As she walked through the halls one evening, the fading light casting long shadows along the walls, she felt a sense of both closure and anticipation. Closure, because she had confronted the room, understood its significance, and emerged with insight. Anticipation, because she knew the estate's influence would continue, subtly guiding, challenging, and instructing her in ways she could not yet predict. The aftermath was not an end, but a transition, a new phase of understanding, responsibility, and engagement with the living history she now inhabited. In the quiet aftermath of confronting the locked room, she began to understand that the estate's true legacy was not the inheritance itself, nor even the secrets the room had contained, but the profound awareness it demanded. The walls, the shadows, and the artifacts were all instruments of reflection, designed to compel engagement with history, morality, and human complexity. The estate had taught her that inheritance was not merely about possession, but about responsibility, an understanding that stretched across time and generations. Walking through the halls now felt different. Light streaming through the tall windows highlighted architectural details she had previously overlooked, carvings, faded inscriptions, and subtle patterns that spoke of intention and foresight. Each room seemed to communicate a silent message, as if the house itself recognized her awareness and willingness to see its lessons. The estate was no longer a passive setting but a living narrative, guiding her understanding of legacy, consequence, and curiosity. She reflected on the lives that had come before her, tracing their fears, decisions, and obsessions through the preserved artifacts and written records. The locked room had been a crucible for countless generations, a place where fear and curiosity collided, producing consequences both tragic and instructive. Some had fled, some had succumbed, and others had preserved the legacy with cautious reverence. She felt a profound empathy for these individuals, recognizing the weight they had carried and the stakes involved in preserving the estate's secrets. Their lives, she realized, were inseparable from the narrative of the house itself. The experience reshaped her perception of fear and curiosity. The locked room had been a symbol, a challenge, and a teacher. Entering it had required courage, but it had also demanded respect, patience, and careful observation. She understood that knowledge without comprehension was dangerous, and that history demanded engagement rather than mere observation. In confronting the room, she had confronted the essence of human legacy, the interplay of desire, responsibility, and consequence that shapes every decision, every life, and every generation. Even the small details of the estate now carried weight. The subtle tilts of furniture, the positioning of mirrors, and the arrangement of letters and artifacts all contributed to a layered narrative she had only begun to decode. Each discovery reinforced the notion that the estate was a living document, continuously instructing and challenging those who inhabited it. She felt gratitude for the subtle guidance and patience embedded in its design, recognizing that her journey had been as much about personal growth as it had been about uncovering secrets. Emotionally, she experienced a complex mix of awe, humility, and cautious satisfaction. The room had revealed its contents, but more importantly, it had revealed its purpose and her role within that history. She had confronted fear, navigated uncertainty, and emerged with insight that transcended the mere physicality of the estate. The lessons were subtle yet profound, that knowledge carries responsibility, that curiosity must be tempered with respect, and that understanding legacy requires both engagement and reflection. The staff's behavior shifted as well, reflecting a recognition of her changed relationship with the estate. They offered assistance when appropriate, yet maintained boundaries that preserved the integrity of the house's lessons. Their quiet guidance and discreet support reinforced the notion that she had become a participant in the estate's living history, entrusted not only with knowledge but with the responsibility to maintain and respect it. The subtle, symbiotic relationship between her and the caretakers added another layer of meaning to her experience, demonstrating how human stewardship intertwines with legacy and history. As she walked through the estate in the fading light of evening, she allowed herself to reflect on the transformation that had occurred. The fear and obsession that had once driven her had been tempered by understanding and respect. The strange occurrences, shadows, and whispers that had haunted her exploration were now understood as instruments of instruction, not merely as threats. The locked room had fulfilled its purpose, guiding her toward comprehension, reflection, and growth. In her journal, she began documenting her experiences, knowing that these records would serve as both a personal reflection and a guide for future generations. She wrote about fear, curiosity, and the weight of inheritance, emphasizing the importance of patience, observation, and respect for history. She chronicled her emotional journey, detailing the lessons learned from the locked room and the estate itself. Each entry was both an acknowledgement of the past and a preparation for the future, ensuring that the legacy of the house remained vibrant and instructive. Ultimately, she understood that the locked room's power lay not in what it concealed, but in what it revealed about human nature, responsibility, and the passage of time. The estate had demanded engagement, tested her resolve, and rewarded her with insight. Its lessons were enduring, haunting yet profoundly instructive, reminding her that curiosity, when guided by respect and awareness, could lead to understanding that transcended mere knowledge. She had inherited not only a house, but a living history, a challenge, and a responsibility that would shape her life for years to come. As night fell over the estate, shadows lengthened and light dimmed, yet the atmosphere was no longer threatening. Instead, it felt like a culmination of centuries of history, a testament to human curiosity and the consequences of choices across generations. She stood silently in one of the grand halls, absorbing the weight and beauty of it all, understanding that the estate's lessons would continue to echo through her mind long after she left. The locked room had spoken, the past had returned, and she had listened, forever changed by the experience. In the end, she realized that legacy was more than property or wealth. It was memory, history, and the careful transmission of lessons. The locked room, the estate, and the generations before her had all played a part in shaping this understanding. She had inherited not only material possession but also the wisdom, caution, and insight embedded within centuries of human experience. And with that realization came a sense of profound responsibility, tempered by awe and tempered by respect, a reminder that some truths, though difficult and haunting, are vital to acknowledge, preserve, and honor.